This is the Dough World of Money podcast. My name is Rob Berger. In episode 364, we're going to talk about cash stuffing. We're going to talk about how much money you think you need for retirement. And we're going to talk about student loans because there are a couple of things going on in that world that we need to talk about. And it's bright and early on Friday. I'm actually up, I guess I'm up at a normal time, except that I'm recording this probably earlier than I normally do, which is to say I'm usually a bit more awake. But I'm getting on a train here in a little bit and heading to Philadelphia for the World Open Chess Tournament, which is a big chess tournament here on the East Coast that I've played in a number of times. Last year I played in it and I got totally demolished. It was embarrassing. I was almost a 2,000 rated player, which is pretty good. It would be like a decent high school player, a basketball player. That's how I would think of it. Or maybe a college player but doesn't get a lot of playing time. That would be a 2,000 rated chess player, you know, if you compared it to basketball. And I lost like over 100 rating points. I'm in the 1890. It was rough. So hopefully this year's better. All right. So I want to dive right in. And I was, searching the internet as I'm prone to do, and I came across cash stuffing. And I thought that's an interesting term. And so I, did a little research, and I'm like, wait a minute. This is the envelope budgeting system that my parents in the 70s used. That's what it is. They've rebranded it. They now call it cash stuffing, which I will readily admit is a much cooler name. And folks on TikTok, basically, and YouTube, I guess, have made it cool again, which I find just delightful. And I'm gonna show you, for those watching on YouTube, this is a still version. I just hit pause on a video. And this video is a lady you can see her cash there. So for those just listening, she has a tray of cash. Like the bills are standing up. So there's hundreds, 50s, 20s, 10s, 5s, and 1s. I don't know what she's got there. Maybe, $500, $600, $700. And there's a little zipped up sort of notebook. And in it are envelopes with different budgeting categories. And this video is going to show her taking her cash in different amounts, stuffing it into different envelopes depending on the category, the spending category. And that's the video. And apparently this is sort of caught on TikTok and YouTube. In fact, I watched one video of a lady that has a business selling these cash stuffing books, the zipper like notebooks, I guess, and made like $850,000 last year or this year. I don't know, 850 grand. And I'm thinking that's a lot of cash to stuff. That's not bad. And so I thought about this. Well, what are like the pros and cons of this? Should I be cash stuffing? Which, I don't think I'm going to do it, but it could be a good way to budget, right? And certainly my parents, I remember in the 70s, they would have envelopes with money in it for certain budget categories. And I do think there are some definite advantages to cash stuffing. And the first is, and this is just true generally with the envelope budgeting system, you kind of always know where you stand. And when your budget for eating out, when the envelope is empty, you stop. There's nothing to spend. It's gone. And so in that sense, it could be a very effective way to budget, right? And I like that. Now, part of me thinks, you don't have to budget this way for every single category of spending. For example, my first thought comes to mind is buying gas, at the gas station. Do I have to go in and talk to somebody? That sounds awful. Can I just use my iPhone and tap the pump and pay for my gas? So I'm not sure, even if I were to use this, I don't think I'd use it for every category, but I could see where it'd be advantageous. The other thing that I think probably catches the appeal of a lot of people, let me go back to this image on the screen, is it looks like fun. I mean, it almost looks like you're playing with Monopoly money. You've got it in the stands like you're ready to buy Boardwalk. And, budgeting, most people probably wouldn't describe budgeting as fun. But for some people, I think this is fun. It's almost like gamification of budgeting. And so, if that works for you and you find it fun, I'm all for it. I mean, anything to help you control your spending. Now, I will say, though, I do think there are, apart from like trying to buy gas with cash, there are some definite disadvantages of this approach. The first, of course, is security. You're going to have to, take out all this cash out of the bank and bring it home. Maybe not, the safest thing to do. So that would be concern one. Not to mention you could just lose it. Maybe not the biggest risk, but I guess it's a risk. And as I mentioned, there's the convenience factor of actually paying cash for everything, which to me is just a pain. Like, you go to the grocery store. I always do self-checkout. I don't want to pay cash at self-checkout. And in fact, I'm trying to think at Whole Foods, there's like 3 different grocery stores I go to. One is Whole Foods. I don't even think it takes cash. I could be wrong, but I don't think it does. So there's just the convenience factor, which would probably end it for me. But the other thing then is I like the cashback credit cards. I haven't talked about it on the Dough Roller Money podcast. If you watch my other YouTube channel, Rob Berger, I've talked about it some, but we've been saving and investing our credit card rewards for years now. And I need to do an update video, and I need to update the balance. But, we invested, so it goes up and down for that reason as well. But we're talking 30 to 40 grand now. So that's not insignificant. And it's all from cashback rewards. So, I personally wouldn't want to miss out on that. But, apart from that, hey, if cash stuffing works for you, or you haven't heard of it before, but you kind of like the idea, check it out. Go to YouTube or, TikTok if that's your thing, and check out the cash stuffing. I admit it's fun to watch some of these videos. I didn't spend all day watching them, but I did watch one. And she seemed to be having a lot of fun. So there you go. That is cash stuffing. All right. On to topic number 2. I think I'm going to go with student loans, because there's 2 things going on, and then I'll get to retirement. There's 2 things going on with student loans, and I've got my iPad here with a couple of articles, and I'll drop these into the show notes. The first issue is that we're expecting the Supreme Court to come out with a ruling. The experts say it'll be today on whether or not President Biden's attempt to forgive student loans is constitutional or not. It'll be what it is, right? But so here's the issue. It's going to cost, I think the latest number is about $400 billion. That's the cost. And normally a president can't go off on his or her own and spend $400 billion. We have these, government with checks and balances. So Congress, the House, but Congress controls the purse strings. And it can authorize the president to spend money, and of course it does. But the president can't decide on his or her own to just go, I think I've got a good idea. I'm going to skip Congress, and I'm just going to go spend $400 billion. In this case, what the Biden administration has said was, well, wait a minute. We that's okay. You're right. We can't do that. We would never do that. But Congress has actually given us permission. If you go all the way back to after 9/11, there's a statute, a law that says, in an emergency, we can spend money. And we were in an emergency, right? COVID, it was an emergency. I think the response to that is, that's kind of cute, but I don't think so. First of all, it really wasn't much of an emergency when you did this. And what you did really has, you can connect it kind of, but not really. And so you really overstepped your bounds. And what most people think, most of the experts think, particularly with the current court, which leans conservative, and just so we understand, let's talk about what that means. Conservative here doesn't mean conservative like Republican and Democrat. And I know that's how it kind of lays out. But when it comes to a judge, when they say conservative, what they mean is someone who pretty much adheres to the letter of the law. Whereas a liberal judge would say, well, okay, yeah, that's the literal letter of the law, but let's try to interpret it in light of other things as well. And by the way, for those lawyers listening, some of you might object to the way I've just described it, but I think that's generally fair. That's what conservative and liberal generally means. I won't get into controversial topics because this is a money show, so we won't talk about some of the others. But a fascinating, from a constitutional law perspective, their decision earlier this week on affirmative action is fascinating. So anyway, back to student loans. I think most say, yeah, the conservative court is likely to go against President Biden. However, there could be what's called a standing issue. That is to say, was the plaintiff who brought the case actually harmed? So some think actually the case could go in favor of Joe Biden, President Biden, or his administration, not because what he did actually was legal, but because the person complaining about it wasn't harmed, and you have to have some harm to bring a lawsuit. So it'll be interesting. That's coming out. But the other thing I wanted to share with you is this. I was reading this article in the Washington Post. I don't subscribe to the Post. I don't really subscribe to much, but I do subscribe to Apple News Plus, and so I get access to some of this stuff. And the deal is this. As you probably know, if you have student loans, you haven't federal student loans, I should clarify. You haven't had to pay them for a while now. I think, 3 years? And that's going to change October 1. There's 43.6 million borrowers will resume monthly payments, and it's a collective total of 1.6 trillion. That's with a T. 1.6 trillion in college debt. And the interesting thing to me, anyway, about this article was the impact it'll have on the economy. And what they said was, let me get the numbers right. Investment bank Jefferies estimates the renewed student loan payments will come to $18 billion a month, or 3% of the $686 billion that Americans spent on retail and food services in May. The point being, when these bills come due, when student loans payments resume, it could really take a bite out of the economy. And I find that fascinating on a number of fronts. Of course, one is what it'll do to corporate profits and stock valuations. Will it have a meaningful effect? But the other thing, and maybe more important, is the effect it'll have on inflation. Of course, the Fed's been fighting inflation. It's come down significantly. We're at 4%, but still well above what the Fed wants to see of around 2%. They've now said they'll probably have to continue raising rates to some extent, even though they paused. I'll be interested to see what this does to the inflation numbers. Of course, if it starts in October, we probably won't see the results for a couple of months, is my guess. I'm not an economist, but that's my guess. And so I think it's something to be watching. By the way, I'm not changing anything in terms of my investments, but I definitely think it's something to watch. And of course, if you have federal student loans and you're going to have to resume payments, I'd start preparing now. I wouldn't wait till then. All right. Third and final topic, if I can find it, here it is. So this was a fascinating study. I thought it was fascinating. And it was Northwestern Mutual. They did a survey. And they asked a number of questions, but the one I want to talk about, here it is. They asked folks, how much do you need to retire? What's your number? What's the number for you? And they divided the results by age. So if you were I'm going to go from the 20s to the 70s. I'm going to start at the 20s. So folks in their 20s said, to retire, I'm going to need 1.2 million. And I thought, well, I think that kind of makes sense to me. I could see that number. What's fascinating is how the number changes as folks age. You go to the 30s, and the number jumps, I think, significantly to 1.44 million. It goes from 1.2 to 1.44, and I'm thinking, well, why the jump? And I thought, in your 20s, you're just starting out, you're out of school, maybe you're not married yet. 1.2 million seems like a lot of money. You're likely living in an apartment. 1.2 million would do it. But you get to your 30s, you're more likely to be married. Maybe you have kids. Maybe you've bought a home and you're like, 1.2 million, this ain't going to cut it. Holy cow, I need more money. And so the number's just larger, 1.44. Now, when you go to your 40s, though, the number comes back down to 1.28 million. And that I don't fully understand. Part of it could be maybe by then you're like, man, I'm tired. I think I need 144, but if I can just get to 128, I'd be happy. Maybe you're just exhausted. I don't know. But here's the thing. You hit your 50s, and it jumps to 1.56 million. And here I wonder if, in your 50s, your kids, are out of the house or they're in high school. Some of you are thinking, man, I wish my kids were out of the house. And you've kind of gotten a better sense of you have a much clearer idea in your 50s of what retirement will look like than you do in your 20s. that's certainly been true for me and for my wife, I think. And that's where I am. I'm in my 50s. So, I have a much better idea of income and expenses, and, the kids are out of the house. So that's my take. But here was the most fascinating numbers of all. Remember, we're at 1.56 million in your 50s. Guess what 60s and 70s were? Let me ask you, 60s and 70s. Just think about it. So we went from 1.2 up to 1.56, from 20s to 50s, 60s and 70s. What do you think? The number plummeted to the 900s. 968,000 in your 60s, 936,000 in your 70s. And that to me was perhaps the most fascinating thing. Now, I think part of the answer to that could simply be the realities. I'm assuming many of the surveyed folks in their 60s and certainly in their 70s were already retired. And they were living off of whatever they had. And it was lower than what the expectations are for younger folks. And, you could say, well, maybe it's because of future inflation, but I think this is all in today's dollars. So I don't think that changes anything. And I think the reality is, and this is something I've given a lot of thought to as I think about and study safe withdrawal rates in retirement, things like the 4% rule, is that, and this has been my own experience with friends and family that have moved into retirement, is you get by, you just make do. You've saved what you've saved, you have what you have. It may be a lot, it may be a little, and you figure out a way to survive and get by. And not just in some sort of dreadful way, but in a way that is, you're generally content. The family that I know and friends that are in retirement are generally content. And there are different, depending on who they are, some have a lot of money, compared to most people. Some don't have a lot of money compared to most people, but they are generally content, and they survive, and they figure out a way to get by on what they have. And I think, for a lot of folks, it's less than what they may have expected, as they were in the working years. I also think for a lot of people, spending goes down, particularly as they age, and studies back that up. Retirement spending, even as healthcare costs go up as you age, or may go up, overall spending actually comes down. And so I found that a fascinating study. I'm not sure what the takeaway is, in terms of retirement savings. I tended to just save everything I could. I wasn't really aiming for a number, and I still don't have a number. I know that what we have should fund what we spend, even if we live to be, 100. I say should because who knows what the market's going to do, who knows what inflation's going to do. But I've never really sort of planned to a number. But I do think people are able to live on less than they expect to need, as a general rule. Anyway, I found that study fascinating. I wanted to share it with you. It goes over a lot of other things, so I'll definitely include a link to this study in the show notes. Retirement readiness and work timelines, priorities, what people want to spend money on, their expectations to how long they'll live. This was an interesting chart about living to 100 and what the odds are, how likely you are. Millennials and Gen Z think it's 40%. I don't think that's right, is it? It seems a little high to me. God help us if 40% of us live to be 100. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. Anyway, fascinating survey study. So I'll leave links to that both below the video on YouTube and in the show notes of the podcast. Well, there you go. Hope you have a great week. By the way, shoot me an email, dr@doorroller.net. I'd love to hear, topics from you. What questions do you have that you want me to cover in a future episode? Let me know. Be happy to tackle them. Until next time, though, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. Have a great week, everybody.